His paw did not shake. His eyes did not blink. As the stained glass scattered golden light across the flag-draped casket, the church fell silent. Axel, a black and tan German shepherd, had entered alone. No handler to lead him, no command to follow. And yet, when the first note of the funeral hymn began, he stood tall and raised his paw in a salute so human, so precise, no one breathed. The mourners watched from the pews as this loyal K9 faced the front of the church, raised, still, silent, a soldier among soldiers. Pastor Helen, who had led dozens of services, found herself without words. Axel did not sit again, not during the prayer, not during the eulogy, not even as taps echoed through the chamber. And when the service ended, Axel was still saluting, still waiting, for a command that would never come. If this moment moved you, share it with someone who believes loyalty never dies. Subscribe for more stories that stay with you. The morning sun filtered through stained glass, casting long shards of color across the stone floor of the church. It was silent inside, save for the faint creak of wooden pews as early mourners settled into their places. The air held that sacred weight, the kind that wraps around a room before the first word of a funeral is spoken. The casket stood at the front, draped in an American flag flanked by 2 honor guards. Candles flickered softly near the altar. A folded uniform lay on a small wooden stand beside the casket. The nameplate on the lid read, Staff Sergeant Dean Walker. Pastor Helen stood near the pulpit, adjusting her binder. She had led many services, too many soldiers, too many folded flags. But today was different, though she could not yet say why. There was a tension in the air, like the church itself was holding its breath. And then the door creaked. At first, no one turned. Just another guest arriving late, they assumed. But when the sound of claws tapped against the stone floor, heads began to shift. A ripple of whispers moved through the pews. And then everyone saw him. It was a German shepherd, lean, alert, with a black and tan coat and a silver K9 badge clipped to his collar. He entered the church slowly, methodically, as if he understood where he was. His gait was silent except for the soft, deliberate sound of nails on stone. No leash, no handler, just the dog, and the weight he carried. He walked with purpose down the aisle, past polished boots and tear-streaked cheeks. Some soldiers lowered their eyes as he passed, as if acknowledging a fellow serviceman. Pastor Helen stepped back slightly, clutching her binder to her chest. The dog reached the third pew, stopped, and turned to face the casket. He stood there for a long moment. Then he stepped forward. Another step, and then another. He stopped precisely 3 feet from the flag-draped casket. He sat, his breathing was steady. His ears twitched. His eyes locked onto the stars of the flag, and then, with no cue, no sound, no visible command, he stood on all fours. He raised his right paw, and he held it there. The entire church froze. It was not a trick, not a gimmick, not the kind of thing you teach a dog with treats. This was something else, something deeper, something earned. The paw did not tremble. The eyes did not blink. Axel, the K9, was saluting his fallen partner. Pastor Helen's hands lowered, her notes forgotten. A murmur of disbelief passed through the rows. One young soldier placed a hand to his mouth. An older woman clutched her handkerchief to her heart, and Axel stood perfectly still, like a statue carved from grief. No one moved, even. The honor guards, rigid and disciplined, seemed caught in the moment. Pastor Helen would later say she had never seen silence so loud, and Axel did not lower his paw. He did not move when the music began. He did not flinch when the doors opened again and more soldiers entered. He did not blink as the chaplain began the first reading. He simply stood, watching, saluting, if he was waiting for something, as if he had been told to do. But no voice had spoken, no hand had gestured, no order had been given, and still he remained. Pastor Helen cleared her throat, her voice quivering as she read the opening line of the psalm. Her eyes kept drifting back to him, to Axel, the dog who had arrived alone, and so the service began, with one seat empty, and one soldier standing still in the aisle, saluting someone no one else could reach. But this was only the beginning, because what Axel did next would silence the entire room. The words echoed through the vaulted ceilings, but Axel did not seem to hear them. Pastor Helen read slowly, the scripture trembling slightly in her throat, her voice thick with something she had not expected to feel today. It was not just grief, it was awe. The congregation watched her, yes, but they watched Axel more. Some tried not to. Some folded their hands or bowed their heads, pretending to focus on the verses, but their eyes always drifted back, to the front of the church, to the right side of the casket, to the dog who had not moved. Axel's paw remained raised in perfect salute. It had been minutes now, long enough for discomfort to set in, long enough for the human body to fidget. But Axel did not twitch. He breathed, yes, slow breaths. But the rest of him was stone, steady, focused. There was something reverent in it, something ceremonial. It was not a performance. It was a promise. Pastor Helen's hands began to shake as she turned the page. She glanced down, then back up at the casket. She saw the flag, the corners tucked tight, the stars perfectly aligned. She saw the framed photo of Staff Sergeant Dean Walker on a stand beside it. His eyes kind, his posture proud, and next to that photo, a smaller one, Axel as a puppy, tucked under Dean's arm. It took her breath for a moment. She remembered Dean, quiet and respectful in life, always sitting in the back pew when he was off duty, never drawing attention to himself, always with Axel at his side. The dog had grown up here too. Everyone knew them. The way Axel would wait quietly during services, resting under the pew, ears flicking whenever Dean stood. And now, there was no handler, only the dog. And yet, Axel still obeyed. The organ began to play softly behind her, the second hymn of the service. Pastor Helen did not remember cueing the musician, but the notes came anyway, like a current pulling the room forward. People rose to their feet. Uniforms rustled. Tissues crinkled. But Axel did not react. He stood, still saluting, still locked in position. A soldier 3 rows back finally broke. He wept openly, pressing both hands to his face. A young girl beside him, maybe Dean's niece, reached out and held his arm. The man nodded, choking on silence. Pastor Helen swallowed hard and stepped down from the pulpit. She moved closer to the casket, the hymn wrapping around her like fog. She passed the front pew. She passed Axel. She could see his muscles tense but not strained. He was not struggling to hold the pose. He had chosen this, willed it, owned it. As she passed, she noticed something hanging from his collar, not his badge. That was clipped firmly and gleaming. It was a small tag, silver, scratched. It read, "If found, return to Sergeant Walker." Pastor Helen closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was standing at the casket, facing the mourners. Her script lay forgotten at the lectern behind her. Her voice was soft, almost cracking. "There are moments when words do not belong to us," she said. Few heads lifted. There are times when duty continues beyond what we can see. Her gaze drifted back to Axel, and there is a kind of love, she said, that does not need permission to act. Axel remained as he was, still, raised, saluting. And in that moment, Pastor Helen realized something else. The church was full. Every pew packed, yet it was the dog who was teaching them all how to say goodbye. The service continued. Bible verses were read. A letter from Dean's commanding officer was delivered aloud. Stories were shared, some solemn, some even gentle. They spoke of missions, of training, of trust, of the time Axel once pulled Dean from a collapsed structure, of the way Dean always fed him before himself, of the way they moved as one. The church became warmer, filled not just with grief, but with a strange kind of peace. But through it all, Axel stood, saluting. He did not break when the final speaker paused. He did not flinch when a child sobbed openly in the second row. He did not move when Pastor Helen returned to the front and whispered, "Amen." He only stood as if he knew, as if somewhere his partner stood just out of view, watching proud, and outside the sun shifted, sending one sharp beam of stained glass light across the floor. It hit Axel's raised paw, red, blue, and gold, glowing like something holy. But the salute had not yet ended, because one final ritual remained, and in that moment, the entire room knew what was coming next. The church doors had been closed for over an hour now. Outside, autumn leaves whispered across the steps, caught in a breeze too soft to reach the sanctuary. Inside, the stillness remained, but it was not the stillness of death. It was something deeper. The kind of stillness born from reverence, the kind that weighs on shoulders and hearts. Axel had not moved. His paw was still raised, perfectly aligned. The muscles in his back stayed taut, not trembling. His ears were slightly tilted forward, alert, focused, devoted. Pastor Helen had tried not to glance his way too often, but it was impossible. His presence was not a distraction. It was the center of everything. The hymn had ended. The final verse hung in the air like the last breath of a dream. People shifted slightly. Some sat again. Some remained standing. The room was still unsure how to move forward because the dog had not moved at all. Pastor Helen took a slow step back toward the pulpit. Her notes were still there, but she did not need them. What came next required no script. She gave a small nod toward the back of the church, and that was the signal. The honor guard stepped forward. 2 soldiers, dressed in crisp uniform blues, took position beside the casket. One held the American flag. The other moved in slow, deliberate motion to the side, standing at rigid attention. Then, the softest sound broke the silence. A lone bugler raised his trumpet from the choir loft and began to play taps. The notes poured out like folded prayers, each one delicate, final, eternal. The first few notes were enough to draw tears from even the most stoic faces in the room. Shoulders trembled, hands covered mouths. Chests rose with effort, holding in sobs, and still, Axel did not move, not even a flinch. He stood saluting, facing his handler's casket, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. As the bugler played on, the dog's body remained anchored. He was not frozen in fear. He was present, aware. Each note of the trumpet seemed to etch itself into the stone beneath him. It was not a song. It was a memory. The bugler reached the halfway point, the turning phrase of the melody, and that is when Pastor Helen noticed it, a single tear, welling beneath Axel's right eye. It did not fall. Not yet, but it was there. She blinked, unsure at first if she had imagined it. Then the final notes came, soft, slow, absolute. As the last breath of the trumpet echoed into silence, something shifted in the room. Time paused. Every person in the sanctuary, soldier, family, friend, stranger, seemed to lean forward without moving, and then it happened. Axel lowered his paw very slowly, precisely, as if obeying a final command spoken from beyond. His foot returned to the stone floor. His body did not collapse. He did not whimper or curl up. He simply stepped forward, 1 step, then 2. He reached the edge of the casket and gently touched his nose to the flag. Hush swept over the church like a tide. There was no rustling, no sniffles, no whisper, just breath held in every chest. As the dog paid his final tribute, Pastor Helen swallowed hard. Her throat burned. Her hands trembled. Axel held his nose there, against the flag, for 5 full seconds, and then he sat down, not lazily, not in defeat. It was the posture of a sentinel at rest, the kind of rest that only comes after duty has been fulfilled. Pastor Helen stepped forward again. Her voice returned, quiet and full. "Let us pray," she said, heads bowed. Except for one, Axel sat facing the casket, eyes still fixed on it. He did not blink, did not lower his head. While the congregation prayed, Axel kept watch. Even now, with the service drawing to a close, his role was not over. Outside, the wind picked up slightly. Leaves brushed against the stained glass, casting flickers of red and gold light onto the floor. And then, just as the prayer ended, the tear finally fell. It slid gently from Axel's eye, tracing the line of his muzzle, and landed on the floor. 1 drop, like a signature at the end of a vow. A soldier in the second row covered his face with both hands. Pastor Helen closed her eyes, and still, Axel sat guard beside his partner. The casket would soon be carried out. The family would rise. The soldiers would march. But at that moment, the only movement came from a single drop of water on stone, and one dog who refused to leave. When the prayer ended, the silence that followed was not relief. It was weight, thick and holy, the kind of silence that churches were built to hold. Pastor Helen remained still at the front, her hands folded over her binder, though she no longer remembered what it said. No one moved to leave. No one reached for coats or handbags. It was as if everyone had forgotten that the funeral had an ending at all. Axel was still sitting beside the casket. The tear that had fallen from his eye now glistened on the stone floor. One of the honor guards glanced at it, then back to the dog. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered, and yet he held position. The ushers stood by the back doors, waiting for Pastor Helen's signal. The pallbearers were already in place, 6 soldiers who had served with Dean. They stood now in the front row, hands clenched at their sides, their eyes occasionally drifting toward the casket and the dog beside it. And still, Axel did not move. Pastor Helen stepped forward, slowly and gently. She did not want to break the spell, but the service could not pause forever. She approached the family first, Dean's mother, his sister, a young cousin. They nodded softly, eyes red, hearts open. Then she turned to the honor guard and gave the slightest nod. It was time. The 2 guards stepped forward. One reached gently for the folded flag on top of the casket. Axel growled. It was not loud, not sharp, not a threat. It was low, guttural, a warning made of grief. The soldier froze, his hand hovering just inches from the fabric. His partner turned slightly, unsure what to do. The room seemed to hold its breath all over again. Pastor Helen stepped closer. She raised one hand, palm out. Not toward the dog, toward the men. "Wait," she whispered. She turned to Axel. Her heart pounded. She had spoken in front of generals and grieving mothers. But speaking to this dog felt different. "Axel," she said softly. He did not look at her. She tried again. "Axel, it is time." "He is ready." The dog twitched. His ears flicked, but he did not move. Then the sister stepped forward. Her name was Marie. She had barely spoken during the service, her grief carved into stillness. But now she walked gently toward the casket. Her boots echoed with each step. She knelt beside the dog, her movements slow and respectful. "Thank you," she whispered. Axel turned his head toward her. Their eyes met. "You kept your promise," she said. "You brought him home." Axel blinked once, then twice, and then, slowly, he stood. He took one small step back, clearing space beside the casket. His body remained alert, but the tension in his stance had softened. The warning had passed. His permission had been given. The soldier stepped forward once more, lifted the flag and folded it tighter. The triangle shape was crisp and exact. He turned and presented it to Dean's mother, who took it with both hands trembling. The pallbearers stepped forward now. They positioned themselves around the casket, lifting gently, evenly. The room shifted as they turned, carrying Dean toward the door. Axel walked beside them, not behind, not ahead, beside, in step. The soldiers did not break formation for him. They adjusted to include him. It was instinctual, automatic, as if he was one of them. And in every way that mattered, he was. The organ began again, soft and mournful, the final processional. Pastor Helen opened the doors herself. Sunlight poured in, bright and gold and cold, the kind of light that made tears shimmer. The wind caught the hem of the pastor's robe and tugged gently at the leaves gathered near the steps. Outside, the hearse waited. Axel stepped down the steps first, then paused beside the vehicle. As the casket was loaded, he sat again, still, tall, watching. One final transfer, one final goodbye, and then, as the door was closed, Axel stood and turned back toward the church. Pastor Helen was still in the doorway. Their eyes met. She nodded. So did he. It was not a trick of the light, not a fantasy or projection of hope. It was a moment of understanding, real and precise, as if they had both witnessed something too sacred to explain. Axel turned back toward the hearse. He would not ride inside, but he would follow, because the journey was not quite over. Not yet. The engine of the hearse rumbled gently, low and respectful, as if even the machine knew this was not a normal procession. Mourners began filing out of the church behind it, slow and quiet, their footsteps muted by grief and reverence. Most had never seen a military funeral before. None had ever seen one like this. Axel walked at the side of the hearse. There was no leash, no handler, no voice telling him what to do, and yet his pace was steady, matching the wheels beside him. His eyes forward, his body upright. He was not just part of the escort. He was the escort. People stepped aside instinctively as he passed. They did not call to him. They did not reach out. They only watched, many with hands over their hearts, a few with silent tears running down their cheeks. Some took photos, but most did not. To capture this felt too much like stealing. As the hearse reached the cemetery gate, the honor guard broke into a new formation. A group of Marines stood waiting near the gravesite, rifles at rest. The folded flag had been passed to Dean's mother earlier, and she now stood beneath the canopy, barely breathing, holding it to her chest as if it were Dean himself. The casket was lowered with precision. Axel sat down again, just feet away, facing the hole in the earth. Pastor Helen moved to the head of the group. Her Bible was open, but her voice was not strong. The wind tugged at the pages. She cleared her throat, steadied herself, and began the final rites. "From dust you came," she said softly, "and to dust you shall return." She had said those words 100 times, but today they felt heavier. The 3-volley salute came next, sharp cracks in the air, controlled bursts of farewell. The sound jolted some of the younger mourners. One child whimpered and clung to her mother's sleeve. But Axel did not flinch. He had heard louder. He had stood beside Dean and worse. This was not chaos. This was ritual. And ritual had purpose. The bugler lifted his trumpet again. Taps began, one last time. The melody floated over the field, clear and bright, despite the chill in the air. As the final note drifted into silence, every head lowered. Even the breeze seemed to still. But Axel did something no one expected. He rose again, and he walked to the edge of the grave. 1 step, then 2. And with deliberate care, he lowered himself onto his stomach. Paws stretched out before him. He placed his head between them, his body aligned with the casket below, as if laying guard, as if keeping watch. He did not move, he did not cry, he did not need to. The image alone tore through the silence like thunder. Dean's sister began to sob. "A soldier!" Pressed his palm to his chest. Struggling to breathe, Pastor Helen paused, her mouth open, no sound emerging, and Axel stayed there for minutes, then more. Eventually, the people began to drift away. First the guests, then the Marines. The grave was filled, the headstone placed, the canopy packed up. Still, Axel remained. Pastor Helen waited beside him. She did not speak. She did not try to coax him away. She simply stood a few feet behind, hands folded, watching the sun begin to slide toward the horizon. A funeral director approached gently. "Should we?" he asked. Pastor Helen shook her head. "No," she said. "He is not ready." Axel did not lift his head. The wind picked up. Leaves swirled. The light dimmed. Eventually, it was just the pastor, the director, and the dog. Pastor Helen knelt, her knees pressing into the cool earth. "Axel," she whispered. He raised his head slightly. "You did it," she said. His eyes blinked. "Slow. You kept him safe. Right to the very end." She reached out and touched his collar. Not to tug. Just to feel the cold of the badge beneath her fingers. Then she stood and walked away. The director followed. They left him there, at peace, watching the place where his handler now lay. As the sun dipped fully behind the trees, a final shaft of light broke across the headstone. Illuminating the name, Staff Sergeant Dean Walker, served with honor, never walked alone. And beneath it, carved by request, partnered with K9 Axel. Loyalty without end. Axel closed his eyes. And there, in the silence of a fading day, he lay down once more. Not because he was tired, but because he was home. If Axel's final salute moved you, share his story with someone who understands loyalty beyond words. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what love truly means.